Thank you so much for joining me for this how to paint a Japanese landscape. This is part one. The painting here is not complete and I'm doing it in two parts. So far this part one will take you to the point of having the cherry blossoms painted in here. I'll show you how to make the mountains and push them in the background, have them fogged out, and then we use the palette knife here on these pointy Japanese mountains, and we have this pretty little Japanese tree. All this is put in part one. I don't have the details in the house in this section. I just stop at the cherry blossom tree, and then we'll finish with the cherry blossom tree in part two, and we're going to add some detail to the house, another little tree, maybe a bonsai or a bamboo tree here in the front, and a little panda bear chewing on a bamboo stick. He'll be here, and then I'm going to work on the reflection as well, and then that'll be it for this painting. And this is a very limited palette. We're just using Mars Black, Titanium White, Cerulean Blue, just the tiniest little bit of Cerulean Blue in the sky and in the water, and some Cad Red to make the cherry blossoms. So join me now for part one, and I hope you enjoy it, and then soon will be part two aired. So let's get painting, everyone. So here we just make a light sketch of what you want the landscape scene to be, and here's our limited palette. It's the white, the red, the Mars Black, and the blue. The blue is cerulean blue mixed with titanium white. And here, taking the black, I outlined the mountains of the scene in the front because they stand out really, really brightly. And then with using a mix of the Mars Black and titanium white, we make a variation of different color grays, and in some areas just the straight black, and just sort of fill in those mountains. If you want to slowly follow along with me, you can, stop and pause in between steps to get this done. But we're just going to fill that all in here. Be sure to come back and see part two where I put the new little tree in the front of the scene and that little panda bear, and finish up this tutorial. So here you see we put the dark black, the Mars Black, on the side of the mountains to create shadow there, and it really helps the mountains to stand out. And later we're going to take a palette knife with some titanium white and really put some details on the mountains. Here I'm taking the light blue, and just take your cerulean blue and just add a tiny little bit to your titanium white, make a mix and put that aside, and then just use that for the sky and the water. Just the tiniest little bit of blue. If you're painting along with me at any time where you want to just catch up on the step, just pause your tutorial and then catch up with me. I hope you're painting along with me. I would love to see your work. You can tag me in it on my Facebook, which is Art by Robin. It seems there are two Art by Robins on Facebook, so you could look for me, Art by Robin, or tag me, Robin Landau. As I'm putting some of the blue on that bridge so that it shows through the bridge, because that bridge was sketched in with a watercolor pencil, it looks like I've painted it in gray, but I have not. But that works out okay because we're going to be putting the details in that bridge later, and you'll see some fencing and all that. But here I've taken some dark gray, which, you know, I'm just mixing the two colors, of course, you know, the white and the black, everybody knows. And we're just putting in the formation of those mountains there. And later we'll put a little bit of detail into them and then also fog them out. And they'll look misty and far in the background. So here I've added a little bit more titanium white, and I'm making the mountains here a bit lighter on the bottom part. And just kind of blending those together. And here's our horizon line here. So I'm just pulling that right along the horizon line. Now these mountains are going to have detail added to them, and like I said, and then they'll be, you know, blurred out with some cloud coverage and some mist. And but for now we're just coloring them in that way. And here we're just putting some land formation in the front of the tall pointy mountains, using the same light gray, medium gray. I hope you're enjoying this guitar playing in the background. It was done by a friend of ours, and that's a nice little relaxing piece of music. Now here I've taken and made a wash of the medium gray or very light gray, and so add your water to your mixture and then just kind of brush over the tops of those mountains and take your mop brush or your blender brush and blend it out in a circular motion to create some mist or misty cloud coverage. And then you want to do that in different sections of the mountains and all around the edges of the mountain. Be sure to not mist over the pointy mountains in the front. Those mountains are going to stand out, and they are way in front of the mountains that we're painting on right now. I'm also adding a little bit here on the edges of this land that's in front of the mountains. These mountains are further back than this part of the land that's showing here. So I'm just sort of misting that a little bit as well. So now we're going to take our palette knife, and just on the edge of the palette knife, you're going to get a roll of titanium white and just sort of pull that down into the mountains in different sections. And then you're going to turn your palette knife, and we're just going to make some details of the rock formation with the palette knife, just adding some fine little details to those mountains. We want to keep the shadowed area standing out there, but still put some details in there. So just kind of pull a little bit of detail with your palette knife, even on the shadowed area. The effect turns out really nice. So just kind of take your roll of titanium white on the end of your palette knife, and you can use that small end tool to kind of pull it down. And when you're pulling the paint down over these different areas, if you're just gonna sort of pull the texture down, then just very, very lightly drag it down, and then it leaves, of course, that darker color behind, but just adds texture to the front of the mountain. If you feel uncomfortable with this, as you're going to take on this step, take a little piece of paper, like an old canvas or a piece of mixed media paper, and do a practice run. So paint your brown, just paint a mountain formation, and then practice your palette knife on it, how you just sort of drag the texture down. So then when you do it on the painting, you won't be afraid that you're going to mess something up, okay? And if you feel like you've gotten it too heavy in certain areas, you can actually go down and grab a little bit of your gray and put a roll of that on your knife, and then just sort of drag those details in on top of the white if you feel like you got it too heavy. But I think it looks good. And now I'm sort of adding a little bit more mist in the background here. I've actually put a little bit of that light blue cerulean and titanium white mixed in, and just sort of misting the background a little bit here. Now you see there's a bit of a sketch up there, and it's hard to tell from looking at the screen if that's part of a mountain that's in the background or if it's the tree. Well, that's actually the branch of the cherry blossom tree that was sketched in with watercolor pencil. So here I've added a lighter gray, as you can see, and I'm misting that out, adding a little bit more of mist and cloud coverage to the tops of those mountains. And I'm pulling one of those clouds right in front of the mountain there with a little bit more detail. Now let's take a little bit of that lighter mix and just sort of add some texture to the front of this section of land coverage. And just take your mop brush and kind of pull it out there. Blend it out a little bit. Just adding texture. With a limited palette like we're using here, all the light grays and different variations of gray is what creates the texture. Because normally on a piece of land like this, you would put maybe a dark forest green or a hooker's green, and then you'd want to add some cad yellow and greens on the top and lighter textures, kind of making the texture of the land stand out. But with this lighter palette, this limited palette, we have to use gray to create the texture, that there's actually some, grass growing or slight bushes in the background, because this is all way in the background. The cherry blossom trees are really the only thing that are really far in the foreground of this type of a painting. Even the building is far back. The little panda bear will be very small because it's far back. And then the cherry blossom branch is hanging out over the painting. And here we're putting in the branch to that cherry blossom tree here. Now this is a tree that's way far in the foreground, and like I said, the only thing that's far ahead in the foreground. Does that make sense? I don't know if I explained that right. So anyway, add a small branch on the side, a right hand facing side, and a larger branch on the left hand facing side. And then we're going to add the cherry blossoms. So here we're going to put in a Japanese black pine tree, and these branches come way out from the base of the tree. If you Google a Japanese black pine tree, you'll see how these grow. The pine bushes actually go far beyond the trunk of the tree, and they branch off, to the sides either way. And I'm making mine sort of lean towards the left-hand side of the canvas. So for now, just put in some with Mars Black, put in some of the trunks and branches, and now I'm taking a little bit of the lighter gray and just sort of accenting and adding more detail to the landmass there. So now as you're adding this lighter color gray, just kind of bounce around and scuffle in some texture, and you can see how that's creating the look of some uneven grasses and some little bushes possibly on this landmass. So here on that very straight painted sketch of the branch of the cherry blossom tree, I'm adding a little texture because they have a bit of a bumpy texture to them. So just taking some of the different color grays and just the Mars Black, just adding some lumps and bumps along the branches and adding texture. Now I'm going to be adding the tops to the black pine trees here, and so just for the bottom layer, we're just going to take the Mars Black and just sort of stipple around in the formation of these different funny shapes that these beautiful trees have. So you see how they're kind of flat and then long, and they come way out from the trunk of the tree. So you're going to want to make those little shapes, and then we'll come back in and put some lighter colors to create the depth and formation of these different pine needles. In Japan, they are prominently seen in a lot of gardens, and they're known as matsu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that perfectly right, but it's Matsu. They're iconic cultural symbols in Japan for endurance and eternity. So they are often seen in the gardens around Japan. I'm sure you're familiar with what I'm talking about. This is a tree that's often seen, and a lot of people, create small, tiny versions of it. I believe this is the one that they call the bonsai tree. I'll look that up and see if I'm correct on that. So I did look this up, and it says that the bonsai, the definition for bonsai, it's been around for well over 1,000 years. The ultimate goal of growing a bonsai is to create a miniaturized but realistic representation of nature in the form of a tree. Bonsais are genetically dwarfed plants. In fact, any tree species can be used to grow one. So they actually use many different trees to create a bonsai tree. Looking at some that are sold, popular today, even on Amazon, there's all different kinds of trees. So it's basically dwarfing a tree. But the ones that you do see in Japan are oftentimes these little pine trees. So here I'm just adding a few little bushes down at the bottom of the tree trunks, just kind of pulling them down into the grassy areas. So as I was researching these trees, I noticed that one of the names they referred to was Niwaki. So Matsu, Niwaki, black pine, I guess any of the above. And so here I'm adding a little titanium white to the mix, so we have a dark gray, just sort of stippling over each one of these branches that have the pine needle clusters on them, and just adding a little bit of texture and definition, leaving the background dark. So as you add the clusters on top of the branches, you want to pull some individual little branches down towards each of them and towards the trunk of the tree. So if you look at Google and you see some of these trees, you'll notice that there's a lot of different small branches that connect the sections that go far out to the side. So now I've taken some very, very light gray, almost white, and I'm just going to stipple a little bit of that on top of all these furry branches here, and that's going to make the tree look more realistic. So I'm just taking a little bit of the darker gray and just sort of adding some shadows here on the grass, just in and around. Just some cast shadows. So we need to add reflections in the water. The trees would be reflecting into the water, and also parts of the hill and the mountain. The mountain is much further back, but I'm just putting a tiny little bit of that where it may reflect into the water just a bit. And then in part 2, so please come back for part 2 of this painting, the completion of it. We'll be putting a glaze over the reflection and making this water look very glassy and pretty, like a beautiful, smooth body of water, very relaxing. And we'll also be adding some reflection from the bridge as well, a little bit later on. So here, I'm going to take the brush and just go in a little downward motion just to kind of pull some of the shadows from the mountain. I don't want a lot of that showing in the water, because those mountains are further back, but just a little bit, just a hint of it, some of those streaks in the mountains there. So now I'm going to paint in this front section of land here, just that the house is sitting on, this really cute little Japanese style house, which I'll be putting the details of that house in part 2 of this tutorial. And this dark section here is the base of the house. It's a little stone section of the house, like the foundation. And I'm just putting it in dark right now, and then just putting in the land, and then later I add some definition, just the impression of stones on that section of the house. Now I'm going to add the walking bridge and also the shadow of the bridge in the water, and the lady that's walking across the bridge holding a big red umbrella. And now we're going to add the little fence post on the bridge, going straight up and down all the way across. Now I'm adding the reflection from the bridge in the water. So you're going to want to take it down in the shape of the bridge. And as you can see, I'm doing a little bit of a tapping, sort of a wavy motion, because I wanted to, take on some of the motion of the river here. Very calm, but it's not a complete mirror reflection. So I'm making it a lot lighter, and I'm using a medium gray to do this. So using a very watered down medium gray, I'm just pulling a little bit of that over the section that some cast shadow is coming down into the water over the reflection. Please hit like and subscribe if you're enjoying this tutorial, and any questions you have, just leave in the comment section below and I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. I'd love to hear from you. The reason for adding this little bit of medium gray in these areas is to put a little bit of detail on the mountains, and also to show where one mountain is standing out in front of the other, but still leaving that muted, fogged out look because these mountains are very far back. Using just a little bit of titanium white on your palette knife, just go along the bank of the land there. Now with a very light gray, I'm just sort of adding a bit more to the mountains in the background. Just a tiny bit more definition, details. Now with a little bit of titanium white, just add a little more texture to the top of the trees, and it will help them to stand out a bit more. Always leaving it dark in the background, so we've layered lighter grays on top of these pine bushes, and then now the white will help them to really pop. So using dark gray and just Mars black in areas, I'm bringing those branches out to the far-reaching branches there. And now we're painting the lady on the bridge with a big red umbrella. So we're just making the figure of a woman here, and this is her head and shoulders on top of the railing of the bridge, and then bringing the body down below the railing so you see her dress through the post of the bridge, and just using Mars black. And then we're going to get a little red, and we're going to make an umbrella. We're just going to make an oval shape over the top of her head, leaving her head showing, so it's the underside of the umbrella that's showing. It's fun doing painting with such a limited palette. I mean, this red is just the only color that we're putting on here, besides that tiny little bit of blue in the water and the sky. And then a little later, we're using the red along with some titanium white to make the cherry blossoms. But it's a lot of fun just using such a limited palette. I'm enjoying it. I hope you are too. So here we're just taking the cad red with a little titanium white and putting some of the cherry blossoms onto the branches, kind of bounce around from branch to branch so that nothing looks too uniform. And this is just the beginning of the details on the cherry blossom trees. So come back and join me for part 2. We'll finish up the trees, we'll add the shadow or the reflection of the lady on the bridge into the water. We'll finish up the little Japanese house there and add a bonsai tree or a bamboo tree in the front, and finish up the reflection in the water with a glaze of cerulean blue and titanium white watered down. Also adding a panda bear, and then we're going to call it complete. So come back and join me for that. And thank you all so much for joining me for this tutorial. Please leave a comment like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care, everyone. Be safe. Bye-bye.